Good afternoon, folks out there in the internet. Um, Welcome to the first of what we're hoping is going to become a regular weekly engagement with some of the folks who are part of our community and our membership in arts, religion, and culture. To get a little bit of the housekeeping off the top, ARC is an organization that supports individuals and organizations that work at the intersection of creative and spiritual practices. And part of what we're trying to do in this season, where many people are feeling isolated and disconnected, is to give an opportunity for folks who are in our membership and in our networks and in our community to share what they're doing, kind of what is captivating them, how are they pursuing greater life and kind of flourishing of the world around them, and kind of what are they digging into. And so I'm really grateful today to be able to bring on for the first of these my good friend James Howard Hill Jr. So he'll be joining us briefly. We're going to spend 20 minutes, half an hour together talking shop. And during that time, I would love to encourage folks to, if you're watching live in Facebook, drop some questions in there into the live stream. They'll show up for us. And when we get to the end of the conversation, we'll toss some of those to James so he has an opportunity to kind of share with you all in response to some of the questions that you may have. So my name is Callid Keefe-Perry. I'm one of the co-executive directors of ARC. My colleague Tamisha Tyler is on the West Coast out in Pasadena, so I sometimes talk about this office as ARC East. So coming to you from ARC East here just north of Boston, my name's Callid, and I'm going to bring in James Howard Hill Jr., the incredible scholar and my good friend. Hello, James.
Hey, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Pretty good. So, where are you these days, and how is it with you and yours?
Yeah, I'm in Evanston, Illinois right now, with my family. So first off, just sending my love out to everyone who's watching. We're all in the midst of difficult times, so I hope this conversation can bring some relief, some joy, even if it's temporary. So thoughts and love to everyone. Yeah, but we're out here in it's sunny today, so we say sunny for today, Evanston, Illinois. So
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So James, to get things rolling, part of the context of, the way that kind of we tend to think about things in kind of arc is that like embodiment matters, where we come from, and the stuff that makes us up is hugely important. So to kind of start with, to introduce folks to you, rather than me just kind of reading your bio, which sometimes feels just like very performative, I want to ask the question a slightly different way, which is kind of like, how would you talk to folks about who you are and where you come from? Like, who are you and yours?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Who am I? I am the oldest son of Nita Girl and Sugar Man. My people come from Temple, Texas, so I'm definitely a Southerner at heart, and have I've had to navigate through a lot, as is the case with many, if not most, folks who are watching. So, I'm looking forward to getting into say some of those questions or some of those conversations in detail. But just briefly, if you ask, who I am, I'm definitely my mother's son. I'm my father's son. I'm Etta Faye's grandson. Eartha Jean, God rest her soul's grandson. Shout out to Charlene and shout out to Shannon. Shout out to my brother Justin. I am someone who belongs to many other people, and it's a part of a much broader collective. So yeah, I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to shout out the people who's most important. I'm Jessica's partner, Lennox's father, for sure. Lucy May's guardian. So Lucy May is our beautiful Rottweiler. So yeah, I'm part of a much broader collective, and I'm glad to be here.
Terrific. Um, One of the things that kind of brought you to the table today is kind of your long association with what we've been doing and the kind of the new iteration of ARC, but in particular, the fact that you were the selected recipient of the 2020 Rubem Alves Award, and that's one of the things that ARC gives out in recognition who's at the edge of doing community work that is about embodiment and religious reflection and the arts. And so I'd love to kind of allow you the opportunity to share with some folks, both kind of maybe professionally, and vocationally, recognizing that those aren't always the same thing. Like, kind of,
Sure.
what have you been doing? What's been captivating you? Kind of, what have you been thinking about? What have you been reading? What has been kind of giving you life? And or if there's been some things that have been stumbling blocks and have not been life giving, and you want to
Yeah.
talk about that for a little bit, we can do that too.
Yeah. 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 I'm a PhD candidate, so am I allowed to say I haven't been reading much right now? Because you're asking me,
Of course you can, man. During
yes,
this day and age, you can do whatever you
yeah.
need to
So
do that gives you what you need.
yes, I haven't been doing much reading, I've definitely been creative, because I think that, for me, what's been life giving in this season is, I think, for many people, and I hope we have an opportunity to expand on this, this moment that we're in, this global pandemic, what's happening all around us, to really, the way I've been thinking about it and processing it, what does it mean to work and live and exist, in the region and shadow of death, which for some of us is not a new question, right? It's a different inflection right now, right? So for me, I've pondered that, going back to that scripture, the region and shadow of death, like that language is not just abstract, or it's not metaphorical. Like, I've in my own life, I've experienced that. So that's why, as a young person, when I encountered that scripture like that, even when I encountered it as a child, as an adolescent, that wasn't at like, I when it said, for those who live in the region and shadow of death, I'm like, yes, that's where we are. And so it's been just different moments in my life where that term has taken on new meaning. So,
Mhm.
in this particular moment in the PhD program, for me, I've been thinking about, what does it mean to even do a dissertation, in this particular moment? What does it mean to cite sources? What does it mean to compile data? And I don't have a full answer for that. I have some thoughts. We can get into the thoughts I have, for sure. But for me, it's been engaging in the arts. It's been really, I believe I'm entering into a new season of life, because I begin to shudder when people introduce me as a scholar first, like James Hill, the scholar. Was like, well, like, it's like, there's
So
not a
so so
there's
that's
not
it.
a
So what would you so would you prefer to be introduced as, or maybe it's just
Yeah,
James?
yeah. James is dope, but I definitely want to get to the point where I earn the right to be, seen of as a creative, right, as an artist. Because so many times it's like, he's a scholar who also does some artistic things as well, but it's almost like, it's more profitable and marketable to present yourself as a scholar, and then you want to just kind of get into, like, oh yeah, I do some art stuff that's really not serious, but I paint and take photos from time to time, but I want to know that the thing that,
Mhm.
I'm known for is the fact that, I write things that people read and cite from time to time. And 3 years ago, I would have loved for you to introduce me as a scholar. 2 years ago, perhaps, I would have loved for you to introduce me as a scholar, because I needed that validation, right? And I needed that, particular type of affirmation. And thankfully, I've received that enough externally, and also through, shout out to, our mental health professionals, through my therapist. I've received enough of that validation and done the work to really, receive that and know that for myself internally, that, like, you can just, at this point, you can call me James and say that, I take photographs, I write, and from time to time, I read and I engage in thought that other folks have, produced before me, and I do that, and that's a part of a much broader conversation. So nowadays, I'm much more interested in having that and facilitating that broader conversation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The thought that just occurred to me, James, is, you were talking about how scholars, who are also artists, kind of
Mm-hmm.
get, talked about, like the art that they do is this other thing, and
Mm-hmm.
the thought that crossed my mind is like, oh, that's what I do for stress relief, right? Which
Yeah,
means that we've turned to art as a therapeutic,
for sure,
thing, which is interesting, right? Because there's this whole line of problematic thinking about religion, where religion's just therapeutic. So
for
now
sure,
those of us that think about religion are now turning to the arts, which could also be incredibly powerful. And sometimes we just think about them as therapeutic modalities too, instead of
for
them
sure,
actually being the place where incredible life is, where
for sure.
exploration is, where the edge of who we are is being tested and explored.
For sure, but no, I don't. You and I have talked about this often. I don't categorize it. And in fact, I want to unsettle these sort of, categorical distinctions, because for me, I've had open conversations with, my advisor or other mentors, like it's clear to me, like if I can't engage my dissertation as a creative work, I'm gonna do something else. Like there's this idea, and that's why someone like Alves is so inspirational to me, because Alves also saying for, James Cullen, for me, I have to be creative. And especially when you've done something, I'm not 17 anymore. I'm not 8, I'm not 19 anymore. Like I've been doing this. Like I entered college in 2007, right? It's 2020 right now. And so if you're telling me I've been doing this thing for 13 years and I can't find joy in it, and like I need to suffer now before I reign later, and then people are saying this is what a dissertation is. You don't do something for 13 years and then look to your neighbor and say, this is why I don't have fun doing it. Like for me, I study popular culture, I study popular music. People get excited about making albums. To make an album is a rigorous process. Working with an executive producer is a rigorous process. There's a reason why the demo that you hear or that you may not have heard is not on the album, because it's a demo. You're supposed to take it through a rigorous process. But when I watch documentaries that come from whether it's Stevie or Nina or Prince or MJ, like when MJ is with Quincy is telling him to go through 20, 30 cuts of the same record. But Michael isn't like going into a corner and crying. He's loving that process. And so there's something that we can learn from artists who engage in this collective process of refining work, that something different takes place in my experience, and it could be only my experience, right? But I don't think it's only my experience. When you get to this dissertation or the work of the academician, you're supposed to you don't take a demo to someone so that we can collaborate together and produce something together. Like you take something to find out how inadequate you are, and that's why folks have anxiety attacks when they take their demos to the people they're working with. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, part of kind of where you have ended up is like capable, right? You've taken exams, you can read the things, the canon. We can come back to that later if you want. But when we're actually doing the thing that we're supposed to be best at, right? Writing, teaching, there's this kind of built-in anxiety because the system itself, in this case, like higher education, isn't actually about collaboration or life-givingness. It's about kind of proving yourself externally or something like that. Is that kind of what's worrying you or kind of making you scratch at this point?
No. To be honest, nothing's worrying me at this point. Nothing's making me scratch. I'm in a good place, and I say that like in a very real way. Have you ever been fired from something?
Yeah.
you know, and you lived. I mean, yeah, sometimes you have to remind yourself that like I've been fired from jobs. I've been fired from whole denominations. Like I have lived life. And so the thing is, this idea, like once you're not afraid of people telling you to go home, like once you realize like what's the worst thing that can happen? People say they don't like you. People saying you don't fit in, don't come back here. Then what are you gonna do? You're gonna go home and figure it out. And so for me, you can operate from a place of power where I can say, no, I'm going to have fun doing this project. And you're going to have fun working with me doing with this project. And we're going to create something that we both enjoy. I don't do this whole, I had to do this and get it out the way. And it's in the bottom of a library somewhere and nobody will ever read it. Like that's good for you and yours. But I've been doing this since 2007. I'm going to find joy. I'm going to do something else. And we're going to work together to claim that joy and work through that. Because this is a document that I'm producing that my community helped me forge. And if people don't get that, it's one thing if you don't get that. That's fine. You're not going to stop me from claiming joy. And if we can't claim joy, we need to have a grown-up conversation, and you need to bless me so I can do something else. Now, with that being said, thank God that I work with people who understand that language. But that language is understood because it's also understood that this is a job. I'm in the fourth year of my program. I've been on this job for 4 years. And if I'm going to be on the job a fifth year and a sixth year, it's because it's worth coming back to. If it's not worth coming back to, with no harm, no bitterness, we will come together and say we need to do something else. And that's okay, because you know what? We call this a program. This is a job. I've been in my program for 4 years. You've been at this job for 4 years. You've been at this job for 5 years. And if you're coming back to it, have a reason to come back to it.
Yeah. One of the things I've always kind of thought about you, James, and I'm just curious to kind of hear you reflect on this, is that you'll often kind of approach something that everyone just says is a certain way, and you'll ask the question like, why does it have to be that way? Like instead of just presuming that the system is set up the way it is and you've got to deal with it the way that people tell you to deal with it, you're often going to turn to it and say like, why exactly do we have to do it this way? Can someone explain that to me? Does that sound like a kind of a representative of the way that you tend to approach things?
Yes.
just flat out. So James, tell me if the work that you're doing now has to be about collaboration, has to be about joy, has to be about things that you're exploring. What are you working on now? Kind of
Yeah.
what are you doing that is about exuberance, that is about kind of
Yeah.
what you really want to be working on?
Yeah, great question. First is my dissertation. Like I have, like I'm one person, and I think it's from a healthy place. I love for people to ask me what I'm working on. I love for people to ask me how the project's coming. I think that's also something to interrogate. Like it's once again one of the things we take for granted. Don't ask the PhD student how the dissertation is coming along. It Why? Like I think a deeper conversation needs to happen. Like why can't we talk about that? What's happening in your process? What's Because the thing is, many people are being harassed and many people are in unhealthy situations. So that's why they can't tell you what they're writing about, because it's not a healthy process, right? My process is healthy. My advisor, creates conditions of health. My committee, is all about health and flourishing, and know about family. So you can come to James and ask him about his project and his chapters, and I'm going to tell you about what I'm doing in the studio. I'm going to tell you about what I'm cutting. I'm telling you about these demos. I'm telling you about what's not working, because it's creative. And the moment I can't talk to you about the thing I've been working on for 5 years, I need to do something else, right? And that's just me, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I'm working on is a dissertation that I thoroughly enjoy and love to talk about every day. And those who are around me know I love to talk about my dissertation, right? Because I enjoy talking about it. But besides that, and it's also a collective. It's a collective. I'm working on a subject. I'm working on, Michael Jackson, Black popular music, where I feel like my dissertation is a collective, right? Because you can talk about so many different things, and folks have to listen to you because they don't know how to enter the conversation. You talk about Michael Jackson and just sit back. Because folks who say they're indifferent about Michael Jackson will spend 30 minutes telling you why they're indifferent about Michael Jackson, right? And so I have a great project because I always have somebody who wants to talk about it, right? And that helps me. So the first collective thing I'm working on is my dissertation, because it is, I feel, a communal project, and I approach it as a communal offering. That's why I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid to do it. The second thing is photography. I love the art of photography. I love failing, right, and then that's another thing, right? As experts, right, those who coin ourselves experts, we're not supposed to fail, or if we're supposed to fail, we're supposed to fail silently. I love to fail in public. I love that. I love putting up a picture and be like, you know what, I could have done that better, or I love like putting up a picture or a photo that I did in December and being like, yeah, I would have never released that today, because I can see that is different, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with scholarship, right? So the things I'm producing right now, whether it be my dissertation, whether it be photography, the photos I'm producing, videos, those who love my spontaneous web series with my son, tentatively titled Sir, it's just like even things like that. I love kicking it with my family and seeing what can organically come out of it, right? So whether we're talking about organically through photography, organically through just hanging out with my son and watching them play with Coca-Cola bottles, or my dissertation, right? It's everything
Yeah,
that I'm
as
producing is
someone
that,
who kind of has been walking with you as you finally came to the dissertation that you're working on,
for
it
sure.
it absolutely is organic, right? You were
Hmm.
sure you were going to do this thing, and then you were sure you were going to do this thing. But meanwhile, anytime we ever talked about the thing you were sure about, we'd
Hmm.
always end up back talking about popular music,
Hmm.
about oftentimes Michael Jackson. And so I
Hmm.
guess in an opportunity when we got folks listening, and I think there's a lot of people curious, like what is it about Michael Jackson and kind of Black religious life and politics in general that captivates you? Like,
Yeah.
why those things?
Yeah, I love things, brother, that in many ways is undecidable. I also like to lean into the things that we aren't supposed to talk about, right? Right. So it's like so when it comes to someone like Michael Jackson, everyone has such a strong opinion about Michael Jackson. Either way, you talk to some people, and he was a brilliant black entertainer who was naive and was subjected to a host of just anti-black forces, right, in the nation state, through the juridical, through media, and he was naive, and we saw him coming up from a boy to a man, and it's just tragedy. It's tragic what happened to him. You'll talk to a whole other set of people, and they'll begin the conversation by saying he's a criminal pedophile. Right, and many of these people will be in the same space, at the same time, right? And so he's such a lightning rod, such a nodal figure of so many different things. But then when I asked him the second question, what do you really know about Michael Jackson? Besides the spectacle, and the significations of grotesquerie and madness and alleged criminality. What do you know about this person? And for someone who is arguably the most visibilized person in the world, like you can put Michael Jackson next to anyone, popes, kings, presidents, and you can go into the most developed nations where they have one radio in the village and they have Thriller. That's a fact. You know what I mean? Like look at the artwork. Like who does not know Michael Jackson in anywhere, like anywhere? So if someone who's so globalized and so visibilized, try to have a conversation about who this person was, and people will stumble because they don't know this person who they have such a charged opinion about. So I take that, and I also look at the fact that when people want to have when people reduce people to flat narratives, right? Flat narratives, that's difficult for me because that's not my life, right? Right? Because so for me, my father, right? I'm named after my father. I'm a junior, right? We don't have to get into it here, but that's a difficult relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, to my father is the most beautiful person I've ever met in my life. I don't talk to him often, and so at one point in my life, this is something I don't share often. At one point in my early 20s, things got so rough where I was really thinking about changing my name because literally every time you call my name, you summon forth a haunting. Anytime you say James, you're calling two people into the room. Anytime you say James Howard Hill, anytime I see my name on a roster, I see my name on a flyer, see my name on my work, I never just see my name, right? Right. So what do I do with that? Before we start talking about celebrities and what I should do with this celebrity and how to think about that celebrity, what do I do with my dad? What do I do with my name? Because to just say that he is this and he is that, but that's also the man who introduced me to Michael Jackson. That's also he has the most beautiful voice I've ever heard in my. He's a beautiful singer. He has a wicked sense of humor, right? And I've seen him cry. Like I don't have the story that my story is not that my dad never told me he loved me. He's told me he's loved me. He loves me my entire life. I've seen my dad cry and weep over his own condition. I've seen him weep over other people. My dad is a beautiful person. There's also trouble there. I'm named after this man. What do I do with that? Do I ignore that? Do I suppress that? Do I reduce it? Do I reduce him to an evil, maniacal figure because that's the narrative that people are expecting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to wrestle with that. I'm sure that I'm not the only person who has to wrestle with complicated, undecidable narrative that people need us to make decisions over things and people where it's not that easy. So for me, when I think about Michael Jackson, it's you want to put him in these categories as a celebrity, as a wealthy man who and all that is part of the narrative. But you have to deal with that 9-year-old boy, right? That 10-year-old boy on the Ed Sullivan Show. And you can't get away from that boy, right? And I think there's something about Michael Jackson and that beautiful black boy who came from Gary, Indiana, and seeing what happened to that boy, right? And the forces pressed upon the boy. It's not a coincidence that, particularly in the United States of America, there's a desire to exorcise the man from the cultural imaginary. Because if you exorcise the man and flatten that narrative and signify him a criminal and say, oh, I'm glad we got that out of our consciousness. You don't have to deal with the indictment that he brings. That I want to say in my work, the indictment that Michael told us about in his life, right?
So, I mean, my mind is kind of immediately jumping here, but I just want to ask to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm assuming then that you see parallels in terms of the kind of ambiguity and the gray spaces and the indictments relating to religion, the ways in which it comes from one thing, is forced into another thing, is criminalized, is forgot about, and what we don't do is really engage with ambiguity. Is that a parallel that's there for you?
100%,
Yeah.
100%. I think that it's what I want to do is what I want to do is attend to the ambiguity, attend to the undecidability, and attend to the things we rather not talk about. Like people who know Michael Jackson also know that he was abused. They know that he was beaten because literally, just as we know in childhood studies and in studies of domestic violence and really boyhood studies, childhood studies, when they become adults, they begin to share about the harm that they experience, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the moment Michael Jackson becomes an adult, what does he do? The moment after Thriller, he's immediately telling the world. The moment, if you want to get back to a pure and innocent period, J5, Motown, he's saying that's the site of subjection. That's the originary place of subjection and violence and harm. So when people want to say, like, I can listen to the Jackson 5 and I can listen to Rockin' Robin and, Ben and ABC, but, when it gets to Thriller, I just can't listen anymore. You're making a statement
Mm.
about innocence and purity. Because if you can listen to I want you back, and the conditions of possibility
that made it possible for that little black boy to entertain you. And he told you what made it possible for you to like those songs. And you can listen to those Jackson 5 records and not feel convicted, but you can't listen to Remember the Time because the state told you he was a criminal. You got to answer some questions.
So, folks, be on the lookout. Some point in time, this work will be somewhere, and even if that somewhere is just a longer conversation with Mr. Hill here, it is worth getting into the depth. We can do deep cuts about Michael Jackson, and part of what we're hoping Insights is kind of a entree. So James is available. You can hit him up on Facebook. You can get in touch if you want to talk more about Mike. He's the guy to do it. I didn't want to let the time go too much more, James, before we shifted to that other thing that you said is really captivating you these days, which isn't just engagement with text and thinking about Michael Jackson and America, but also your exploration of photography and the arts as a necessary part of kind of who you're becoming. So I had asked James before we got started if he could send over some images that he thought would be a useful kind of part of the conversation. So I'm going to toss a couple pictures up in here. And then if there's anything that you want to say about it, go for it. If you want us to just spend a little time looking at it, we can do that too. So I'm going to start with this one.
Yeah.
Which I believe is a little Hill. Is that right?
Yeah, shout out to the homie. Yeah, yeah. Just real quick, I'll say a brief thing about the ones you pick up. I mean, for me, I created this one at a particular time when I was going through, like I said, the traumas of my own name, of my own identity. Like that picture was taken during a particular time, housing insecurity, violence in the home, right, and having to. So when that, that's the school picture that was taken, right? And so most of us have taken those school pictures. So I look at that boy smiling,
Mm-hmm.
and I look at, and so like that young boy looking back at me and like everything that boy is containing within that smile, like I just wanted to hold that space. Like I produced it at the precise moment where like my own relationship with my father was taking a nosedive. And really, like for me to produce this photo in this moment shows, for me it was saying, speaking back to, I say Junior, right? So if this is James, like that's Junior, right? So speaking back to Junior and saying that like not only do I see that smile, but I'm going to do something in the shading to show that I also see in this moment what was contained beneath that smile that the photographer didn't see, your homeroom teacher didn't see, but there were multiple layers really operating there, right? Which I think many people could say if we all spoke about our childhood picture where we're smiling and going through a host of terrors at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to reflect back to you because actually we've never talked about your photography before. What I heard you just do is say this thing that we've all seen a million times actually holds more than you think it does.
Mm-hmm.
Just by bringing it back in front of you with a different intention, it opens
Mm-hmm.
up into different worlds. And that's that's
1000%.
that's incredible. So I want to zoom. If that's Junior, is that right? If
Mm-hmm.
that's
For sure.
Junior,
For
I
sure.
want to bring a different one in here. Tell me about who this man is.
Yeah, that's James Jr. You know, uh, that was also inspired. This photo was inspired by a great colleague of mine, Peace Lee. She, recently shaved her head for a host of reasons that she, if you're able to get in contact with her, she'd be happy to break that down. But just really first is being inspired by her. But also, for me, I also like a lot of the art is super linguistic. Like a lot, you're oftentimes supposed to look at a picture like this is why I did it. Like I like what I do is like I'll take a photo, like I'll have just maybe like for me like okay, this side image is important, and I'll just start. What I'll do is like I'll try to allow the moment to speak to me, and like 50, a while later, that's what came out of it, right? So for me, is like yeah, that's what that hour produced, and folks can tell me what they see in it, and it's correct.
Yeah, I mean, we one of the things that's often the problem with academics who engage with art is that they want to know, tell me what it means, as if
Hmm.
everything that is art is commodifiable.
Hmm.
Everything can be kind of owned and controlled so that its meaning does something for us instead of
Hmm.
allowing it to, in fact, speak to us and
Hmm.
undecidedly, right? I mean, I guess that's
Hmm.
part of your whole project.
Wait. I'm lying. I do know what that means. I just thought about it. For most, I don't know what it means, but that would actually do. Shout out to Chelsea Yarbrough. I just thought about it. It was Peacely, but it's also Chelsea Yarbrough. That day, I had a conversation with Chelsea about
She was saying like we are giants. Going back to a lot of the things we've been discussing in this
Hmm.
conversation, but as scholars and as particularly rising scholars in our in these dissertation programs, she just used the saying like we are giants. And for me, going back to what we've been discussing, that word means something, particularly like when we're in a field where we're constantly supposed to perform our inadequacy and our inferiority, going whether it be through senior scholars, through institutions, begging for scraps via fellowships and grants. Like this photo for me is like this. In fact, I entitled we are giants, because even as I'm posted up and sitting there, I have to remind myself. So a self-portrait is a conversation I'm having with myself. It's
Mm.
communion I'm having with myself. When you see it, I'm inviting you to take part in a communion, in a process that I've been having with myself a long time. So in this photo, in many ways, this is a conversation I'm having in light of Chelsea, reminding myself that doesn't matter how anybody else sees me, that like I've been doing this for a minute,
Mm.
and I'm here.
Wow. All right, I got one more from you. What are we doing here?
Yeah, that's shout out to Mama K. I don't know if she's watching right now. She's going to be, but Kamika Green is a beautiful woman. She was the first woman who in Waxahachie, Texas. Shout out to Waxahachie, Texas. I was enrolled in a small Bible college in Waxahachie, and I was in that season of life, I was wanting to be a pastor, and that was the vision for my life. And I remember she called me into her. She stayed in a small apartment on campus, and she called me to visit her, as many of us did, just hanging out with colleagues. And she sat down. I sat down on her couch, and she was like, "Boy, you ain't gonna be in Texas for a long time, are you?" I mean, she do you? And I was like, "What you mean?" She was like, "What God has for you is much more bigger than what you think." She was like, "You think you're gonna be a local Texas pastor?" But she was like, "I see you going, across the world, right?" And she was like, you know, Duke is not beyond you. Harvard is not beyond you. Whatever school you want to get into, you're gonna be there. In fact, some of these places, you may end up turning down. She said this to me in 2009 when I was, I didn't think that of myself, right? And so that began a beautiful relationship. She's a mentor of mine, and in this photo, she came down and visited with us after the birth of my son Lennox, and this is just an ancestral blessing. And this is we know this as an anointing ritual. So she brought the bless all, she brought the bless all, and poured the oil over my son and blessed him, and so it's important. It was important for me in that moment for Mama Kim to bless her, this child, my child, who in many ways is a result of the word she spoke into my life. And so shout out to all the oracles, shout out to all the prophetesses, the ministers, the church mothers who spoke words into us that we couldn't speak into ourselves. Mama Kim is definitely one of those women. She's a mentor, she's a mother. I love her. What's up, Mama K?
Thanks, man. So, I want to kind of name out to all y'all who are kind of in the Facebook stream. We're going to kind of do one more pass around a different topic for James, and then we're going to come back to some of the questions. So, if you've got anything or things you want him to reply to, toss it into the Facebook thread. We'll make sure we get into it before we close out. Last image I want to put up for you, James, isn't one that comes from you, but that my hunch is will be relevant for you. I'm going to put on the screen someone who's significant to us both, I think. This is Mr. Rubem Alves. And I'm wondering
1000%.
what does that mean to have his face there in front of you for you?
Yeah,
Like, what does it do to you?
it means everything. He's definitely among the one of the most inspirational people I've ever encountered, whose work and witness I've encountered more than anyone else. Uh, Al, Dr. Alves has given me permission to play the tunes written in my flesh. I think, and I got this from you, brother. When I was in seminary and struggling through a host of struggles, from you, I encountered this sentence from Dr. Alves. I will paraphrase, and he says, "We have forgotten to play the tunes written in our flesh." And I read that, and in the words of James Baldwin, my dungeon shook, and my life was changed. Then I began to study Alves even more, and when I began to study Alves more, I began to read how he struggled in his doctoral program, and he wrote, and I think I just quoted this a few days ago. He wrote down that the his process was rough for him. He was like, it was rough because his dissertation, he wrote the dissertation that he was required to write, but he hated the process because there were no smiles and no poetry, no creativity, no imagination in his dissertation. It was the dissertation that those around him demanded of him, and he said he received the lowest possible marks that Princeton could give him. And so he taught, for a while in the States. If my memory serves me correct, he was at Union for a little bit. But after a while, he was like, you know what, I can do something else. So going back to that, asking questions, not settling. So he went back home, and he still taught. He was a psychoanalyst, and then he started writing children's books and poetry and talking about nature and creativity and imagination. And what I love about Dr. Alves is that when you talk about liberation theologians, he oftentimes isn't brought up. We talk about Gutierrez, and we talk about Dr. Cone, and we may even bring it up womanist voices and mujerista voices. But oftentimes, at least in my experience, Alves is not brought up. And it's not like, okay, we need to include him as well. It's not even about including. What moves me is that he was fine with that. He knew that the decisions he was making would ultimately lead in him being left out a lot of top this and this list, right? And he was fine because of that. Because why? The people who need to know who Alves is know who Alves is. And I think that when we talk about confidence and the way that I seek to orient myself in my program, regarding my dissertation, regarding the fact that I'm fully okay if, after this, I don't have a tenure track job, I'm fully okay with that. It's because people like Alves, people like Dr. Cone, gave me permission to really say that there's something within you, Hill, and you don't suppress that. You don't deny that. You don't peacock and grin at every whack joke that somebody tells you because you need a job and you need to get a grant and you need to get a fellowship. The people who need to know me already do. The people who need to engage my photography and my creativity and my work, they will. And whether 40 years from now, if I'm not on anybody's top whatever list, if y'all don't read my books or assign my books in your classes, I'm good. Because whatever I need to do, I'm doing, I will do, and those who need to know will find out. And that has nothing to do with a grant, a fellowship, or which committee says I'm good enough. Because Dr. Alves said it, that that wasn't necessary. Dr. Cone said that wasn't necessary. And folks assign Cone and assign Alves and still try to tell their students how to peacock for coins in the name of Alves and Cone. That don't make sense to me, brother. Next question. Getting me hot, man. Getting me hot.
All right, next question. The next question is not coming from me. It's going to come from the crew who's out there.
100%.
So here it is. It's Montague Williams. He says, James, can you tell us about your favorite rare photograph of Michael Jackson?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I've never had that question before. Oh my God, that's a beautiful question. And there's so many. So the one the one that I'm going to share, I'll share it too, real quick. So two, that if I end up writing a book on this, I would love for these to be covered. The one is some have seen this. It's an image that I believe for a video or short film that Jackson was doing. He's having his head measured by a white man, right? And so Jackson is standing, and his head is being measured, and it looks like those early 19 medical photos of like what's the term of like where you're moving the skull.
Phrenology.
Phrenology. That's it. It looks like phrenology. So I think that the racial signification of, at this point, there's so many questions about Michael's blackness and Michael's own articulation and performance of his blackness, but just for that image of this white man literally sizing up his skull as he's staring into this camera, it's a haunting image that I love. The second one is also a haunting image, but similar. It's not that one exactly, but it's one. It's adjacent to that. So if you're googling it, it's one of the ones over. You can actually see the man's hands actually measuring it. But that's in the ballpark for sure. But the second one is just a picture of a young Michael, J5 era. He's holding up, he's lighting a lighter, and so he's playing with fire. Right. And so I just that haunting and arresting image of a young Michael Jackson, right, with the lighter, and you can see like J5 Michael, like it's 1970 or 1971, but he has his lighter and he's just looking at it. And so at that moment, it's just young Michael Jackson playing, lighting a light, but to know how his whole life would be about playing with fire, right, and that dance within the flames in many ways, and the inescapability of that conflagration. So those two are the two photos I choose. And there's a one for third measure, a one of Louis Armstrong holding up a little Michael Jackson. I think is pretty dope too.
Awesome. Next one comes up from Tom Hermans Webster. How are you thinking about teaching these days? What's your
Mm.
art of teaching?
Shout out to Tom. Shout out to Tom. Give my love to Corey. I'm glad you both are recovering. For me, the how I'm thinking about teaching. Teaching is not reducible to a university, first of all, or a tenure track gig. I mean, and I'm very open about this. You can look up 2 years from now, a year from now, and see that I'm teaching 11th graders, and I'll be fine with that. I'll be fine with that. So first, it's having more an expansive vision of where I'm teaching. Because for many years, because I needed to be famous and I needed you all to know who I am, and I needed to be seen as this particular scholar, I could only teach. And because I had a PhD and I worked too hard, I was only, there's only a few places that were worthy of my pedagogical presence. That's all that by the grace of God and the ancestors, all that's been taken away. So first, I'll teach wherever I'm given a space to be creative and imagine otherwise, right? And work with people. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the art of teaching, it's all collective. It's the art of teaching. I think would also gesture to Alves. It's all about imagination. It's all about creativity. I read something about. I was once again because I'm really thinking about educating youth and high schoolers, and I was reading just about certain school districts, and they were talking about rigor. And and then metrics and rigor, and we want to rigor. Like the job description was all about rigor, and they're
Mhm.
talking about nine. There was nothing about creativity, nothing about imagination. And I'm a scholar of the humanities, right? And so right now, like we're talking about COVID-19, and yeah, you want STEM, and you want people to use their brains towards this. But like as we're seeing, like I just don't need you to create a vaccine. I need you to be able to think about why Black folks are dying at disproportional rates. And STEM by itself can't get you those answers, brother. And so to prepare ninth graders and 10th graders and 11th graders and seniors to be great scientists, but you don't teach them how to care for people, and you don't teach them how to
Mm.
create, and you don't teach them how to be imaginative. They're creating vaccines and not knowing why Black people are dying at disproportionate rates, not caring what happens to the disabled, right? Not or those who are vulnerable and predisposed to certain conditions. So what does it mean to teach, not just to produce numbers that serve metrics that don't make the world a better place, that provides innovative whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that we can reach metrics and also inspire artists. That one can be competent in a set of skills, and they can also read Toni Morrison. They should also read Ntozake Shange. They should also read Alves, and they should create and paint and be inspired to think to move upon their world while they're creating whatever technological innovations we say we need this year.
Mm. And it also strikes me, James, that part of what you understand teaching to be is broader than not just like higher ed versus like teaching in high schools, but also recognizing that like the way we engage with each other on Facebook and
Yeah,
in conversation is part of how you
yeah.
understand learning and engaging.
Yeah. And what is teaching? So if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter today, like I don't, 3 years ago, I would have given you a whole bunch of, I would have been peacocking for you, letting you know that I read this person and I want to get into this debate and get into this debate. And why are y'all thinking this about this and that about that? I'll send you pictures of my kid. And for me, like that's knowledge production. Like I don't have to tell you that. I love to tell you what I'm reading, but I don't have to go at anybody because I'm confident in myself. I don't have to tear down anybody or let you know that I'm reading these books and everybody else isn't on my level. I spend the whole day showing you pictures.
Oh, James, we lost your audio, James. And a James without audio is a different James indeed. So as you're moving along here, I want to we're going to turn to the last question. Yeah, your audio is out, James. Can't. Yeah, yeah. You can't hear me, and we can't hear you. So there's a headphone problem. Um, so I'm going to pull up this last question and hope that we can get James back in to close everything out. We've got a little bit of a technical, right at the end, technical glitch. I'm going to text James here right on on the sly, which is not so sly because I'm telling you about it. And we're going to see if we can get him back in. Your audio is out, and can you make magic happen? Oh, and now he's back. Perfect. So we couldn't hear you either, James.
Okay.
And now through the magic of refreshing, we're good. I'm going to roll our last question, and that comes to us from DeMarquise Allen. Here we go. I think this is a great one for you. How has the loss of cultural icons like Kobe Bryant or Nipsey Hussle impacted your work? How are you thinking about it? How is it
Yeah.
affecting you?
Yeah. Shout out, Kinfolk. I think for me, the first thing is that going back to what I said about my project, dealing with complicated narratives, right? Because, and I mean, once again, like even that, like you say, celebrities are complicated as my father is complicated, as I am complicated, as you're complicated, and that's not to say equal measure, but just I'm interested how we memorialize people who lived fully into their complications, right, or into their complexity. So when both passed away, immediately there was, people who were saying, you should not mourn. We should not mourn because of different aspects of their lives, right? Nipsey and Kobe, respectively. And without even like saying like, where we should land, I just stood back and it informed my project because I watched these two factions war with each other on whether people were mournable, right? And also, I just watched so many people, colleagues profit on this thing by getting off some essays and some op-eds to expand their platforms in the name of Black Death, right? But but if we call this a teaching moment, I'm doing this in the name of knowledge production, but I'm gaining 800 more followers over this Black person's death, right? And the name of bringing awareness. So I'm always curious on how these different decisions are mobilized, and people are saying they want to create conditions for us to think, but now they're getting a whole bunch of speaking engagements over writing about someone's death in particular ways that they're personally profiting from. But we don't mention that oftentimes when we engage these conversations. But for me, it's important to really think about how people struggle over making decisions over people who are so beautiful yet complicated, right? Because I think that, once again, I want to go back to my contention, at least this goes back to my life, that the difficulty we have, or that many have, in sitting in the room with history, the full account of history, is that celebrities and entertainment is supposed to be a form of escapism. And when you deal with the fact that people were fully people, you have to deal with the fact that your family is fully people. So for me, like I've always made this statement, like I can't, for me, like if you go back 10 years ago, I was a Baptist preacher who said a whole bunch of things that I would never say today. And I've done the work to really say, like, yes, I was a young 18-year-old who was in a storefront church context with around a whole bunch of black men and Black women who had a particular concept of the world, and I was discipled into that concept, and I became a product of that, and I spoke that until I got around people and privileged spaces that put literature in my hands, and I had to be around trans kinfolk and queer kinfolk and disabled kinfolk, and the language I was using that was ableist and transphobic and homo antagonistic. Like, I had to look back at myself and say, bruh, like you're foul. And I had to do the long work of becoming, a person, worthy of friendship. I don't like using the word worth, but someone in whom you could be a friend to. So now when you look at my life and you look at the trans kinfolk who are family, the black queer kinfolk who are among my best friends, and the greatest mentors I could ever have. And you look at my life, and 8 years ago, no one would have believed that would be where I am. 10 years ago, that was out of the question. And I'm only like that because folks have had grace with me, and I'm not a celebrity, so I've been able to change in private, which is the case for all of us. You don't have to make hard decisions and realize how foolish you were while 50 million people are tweeting about you simultaneously, right? So I've had the benefit of not being famous, and I don't want to be famous. And so for me, it's difficult for me to engage in, not difficult in the sense of like I don't know how to, but I can't talk about other folks unless I first remember how am I choosing to talk about myself, because a certain teacher once talked about planks and specks, right? Before you talk about the speck in someone else's eye, you have to look at the plank in your own. And so for me, that doesn't mean you don't talk about the specks in other people's eyes or the planks in others' eyes, but there's something about you the filter through which you engage in critique. And what I know that, once again, I'm in a profession where people love to give critique that's not autoethnographic. Right, right. And I just have to say, like, I was once a fundamentalist Baptist preacher, right, right, right. And so there's a lot of churches that are praying for the salvation of my soul, because the James that they see today was not the James who's behind their pulpit telling us who was going to heaven and who's going to hell. So how that impacts my work is that when I sit back and see how people are responding to the avatars, otherwise known as celebrities, I really am the ethnographer in me is truly curious as to, like, how is that mapping on to their everyday realities. Because many of us who are saying certain things about people who live in Calabasas way over there, you play spades with people who say some of the same things. Every Thanksgiving you sit at tables and play spades, and you have to get that uncle correct. You have to have long conversations with your aunt, you can't say that. Uncle, you can't say that. Cousin, you can't say that. But yet we still play spades, and we eat their macaroni and cheese, and we have difficult conversations with people in our community that for some reason is not mapped onto how we talk about, the avatars way over there. And I don't know what those answers are. There are multiple answers. I don't have all of them, but I just want these moments have helped me attend, to these, for me at least, conceptual disjunctures.
As always, man, I feel like, well, we have talked for years at this point, so it's always been a pleasure to kind of roll things out. I want to kind of pass things back to you. Part of what we're trying to do here with the kind of Insights project is to kind of let people who are in our network know about other people who are in our network. Is there any last thoughts you've got for the kind of ARC and ARC related folks who might watch this? Any things that you can mention around how they could find you? Like, do you have Facebook pages, Twitter, any of that stuff that you want to get out? And anything you want to close out with? What's your kind of closing to this space?
Yeah. My name is James Howard Hill Jr. I'm not hard to find. So, Facebook, Twitter, I'm not hard to find. So yeah, hit me up. Let's build. But for everyone else, stay well. And trust yourself. If there's any word to fellow colleagues, we are in a profession, and similar to other creative professions, and our profession, believe it or not, is a creative profession, much like the music industry, much like Hollywood. It's a place where creatives go with a desire to make an impact on the world, and many of them die there, right? Because they enter into these spaces and they're told how inadequate they are, how insufficient they are, and they spend their whole careers trying to prove to people who are not as talented as they are, who are not as creative as they are, not as innovative as they are, that they matter and they deserve to be where they are. And so for many of us, my desire is that no matter where you find yourself, no matter what your situation, whether it be a great situation like mine, or an abusive one that you don't feel that you can speak to right now, you're brilliant, you're gifted. If no one else says you are, you are. Like, all the things you've had to overcome, what you can do. You know how you've been chopping up. You know what people in the neighborhood have been saying about the way that you are. Give the people in the neighborhood, a church mother confirmed you long before your advisor did. Don't let your advisor words supersede the word of your church mother. The church mothers know more than these people can ever imagine. It don't matter how many degrees they have. The church mothers, the elders who have who can't read the scriptures, but they know it word for word. They looked you in the eye and they told you can change the world. Don't let a $1 billion institution tell you otherwise. God bless y'all. Love you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is James Howard Hill Jr. And so, folks, please give him your best thoughts and Facebook virtual claps. At ARC, we're hoping to continue to cultivate conversations with folks like James, who are at the edge of spiritual and creative practices, who are trying to figure out how to think about this, how to make art about what transcendence is, what connection is, what community is. And so we hope that you'll join us. You can check out the work that we're doing at artsreligionculture.org. You can hit us up on Facebook. This video is going to be shareable, live on the website, and live in our Facebook archives. And we'll see you next week at this time for the next set of the Insights interviews. Thanks again to my friend James, and look forward to seeing you on the other side, man.
All right, love and peace to everyone. Be
Bye-bye
well.
now.
Bye.